And the short answer is that FBI Director Kash Patel has been spreading falsehoods following Alex Pretty's killing at the hands of ICE agents in Minneapolis. Patel falsely suggested that carrying firearms at protests is illegal. So let's take a listen to what Patel had to say, although I do want to quickly remind our viewers that Alex Pretty had a legal license to carry his firearm.
It's one of those moments where you hear an official statement and immediately think, wait, that doesn't line up, because just days after a fatal shooting in Minneapolis, the story coming out of Washington started shifting in ways that left a lot of people uneasy, confused, and frankly suspicious about what was being emphasized and what was being quietly brushed aside. Here's where this starts to feel tense. A man named Alex Pretty was killed during a confrontation involving federal immigration agents in Minneapolis. Almost immediately, the conversation turned toward firearms protests.
The individual approached U.S. Border Patrol officers with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun. The officers attempted to disarm this individual, but the armed suspect reacted violently. Fearing for his life and for the lives of his fellow officers around him, an agent fired defensive shots.
And whether simply being armed meant someone had crossed a legal line. And that's when FBI Director Kash Patel stepped into the spotlight with comments that lit a fuse across political and gun rights circles. Patel went on Fox News Sunday and delivered a blunt warning. In his view, Americans shouldn't be showing up to protests armed, especially not with loaded weapons and multiple magazines. He framed it as a clear boundary. Show up armed, he argued, and you lose the right to peaceful engagement. Bring weapons and you're inviting consequences. In his words, risking violence or breaking the law at a protest is unacceptable, whether it's Minnesota, Los Angeles, or anywhere else in the country.
Maria, and look, Secretary Noem stated it perfectly. You do not get to attack law enforcement officials in this country without any repercussions. You do not get to do that in Minnesota, LA, or anywhere else. No one who wants to be peaceful shows up at a protest with a firearm that is loaded with 2 full magazines. That is not a peaceful protest, and you do not get to touch law enforcement.
On its face, that might sound like a general law and order message, but here's where things get interesting, and where critics say the timeline really matters. Before Patel made those comments, Minneapolis Police Chief Brian O'Hara had already publicly clarified a key detail. According to O'Hara, Alex Pretty was legally armed at the scene when he was killed. That clarification was important because it directly contradicted the implication that simply carrying a firearm at that moment was illegal. Minnesota law allows licensed individuals to carry firearms, and there's no blanket prohibition against being armed near protests if you're otherwise complying with the law.
You have a Second Amendment right in the United States to possess a firearm. And there are some restrictions around that in Minnesota, and everything that we see that we are aware of shows that he did not violate any of those restrictions. He is not a convicted felon, and he is someone that did have a permit for the handgun to carry it.
So when Patel framed the situation as if being armed automatically stripped someone of their rights, Second Amendment advocates immediately pushed back. From their perspective, this wasn't just about rhetoric. It was about whether federal officials were quietly redefining lawful behavior after the fact to justify the use of deadly force. And that tension only grew when Patel confirmed that the Department of Homeland Security, not the FBI, was leading the investigation into the shooting. The FBI, he said, was processing physical evidence, including the firearm. But DHS and Homeland Security investigations were running point.
And as for this latest shooting, yes, DHS and HSI are the lead, and the FBI is processing the physical evidence. So we're in possession of the firearm, which is going to go to our laboratory.
For some observers, that division raised questions about transparency and accountability. Who controls the narrative? Who decides what details get emphasized? And who ultimately answers for what happened? Let's pause here because this is where public reaction really starts to fracture. Gun rights groups didn't respond with silence. The Minnesota Gun Owners Caucus released a statement saying they were deeply concerned about the shooting and wanted a full, transparent investigation before any conclusions were drawn. Their message was clear and carefully worded. Every peaceable citizen, they said, has the right to keep and bear arms, including while attending protests or exercising First Amendment rights. Those rights don't vanish simply because someone is lawfully armed.
I mean, I think unfortunately, without trying to guess what the president meant, what he said, regrettably, is just factually incorrect. It's entirely lawful to carry a permitted concealed firearm at a public gathering or protest in Minnesota, but just simply stating that it's unlawful, unconstitutional, or accepting some sort of personal risk of state violence because you choose to concealed carry in public, that's just incorrect.
Gun Owners of America went even further, condemning what they call dangerous and misleading statements for suggesting that federal agents would rarely be legally justified in shooting licensed concealed carriers should trouble anyone who cares about civil liberties. Even the National Rifle Association, which has historically aligned itself with Republican administrations, issued a rare rebuke, warning that the rhetoric coming from federal officials could erode lawful gun ownership protections.
If you approach law enforcement with a gun, there is a high likelihood they will be legally justified in shooting you. Here is the NRA's response. Responsible public voices should be awaiting a full investigation, not making generalizations and demonizing law-abiding citizens.
That alone tells you how unusual this moment is. When groups that often disagree on strategy suddenly converge on concern, it usually means something deeper is happening beneath the surface. And then the conversation took another sharp turn. Attorney General Pam Bondi stepped in and redirected blame toward Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey. In her framing, the unrest wasn't about federal enforcement tactics or conflicting legal interpretations. It was about local leadership. She accused state and city officials of creating sanctuary policies that, in her words, invited chaos and lawlessness. Bondi went so far as to argue that these policies signaled openness to criminal behavior and undermined public safety.
I can tell you what I observed when I was there. It's extremely organized. The signs they have are all matching. They're well written. And look at what's happening today. How did these people go out and get gas masks, these protesters? Would you know how to walk out on the street and buy a gas mask right now? Yeah, think about that.
No.
Right. All of these protesters out there right now have gas masks on, matching, very expensive, by the way.
She didn't stop there. Bondi also raised allegations of financial mismanagement and fraud at the state level, tying those claims to broader concerns about election security and public trust. In her telling, this wasn't just about a single shooting. It was about a pattern of governance failures that she argued made situations like this inevitable. Now, some people see that as deflection. Others see it as a legitimate critique of sanctuary policies. Either way, the focus kept drifting further away from the central question many people were asking. Was Alex Prey killed while exercising his legal rights? And are federal officials now reshaping the narrative to justify what happened? This is where Kash Patel's past starts to matter in a big way. Before becoming FBI director, Patel was a familiar face in conservative media spaces. He appeared frequently on right-leaning podcasts and outlets where he built a reputation as someone promising radical transparency. One topic came up over and over again in those appearances: Jeffrey Epstein. Patel repeatedly claimed that the FBI director had direct control over Epstein-related files, including the infamous Black Book. He insisted that the reason those documents hadn't been released was political protection for powerful people. He didn't hedge. He didn't speak vaguely. He said flat out that if he ever had the authority, those files would see the light of day. That history matters because once Patel actually became FBI director, his position changed almost overnight. Suddenly, he was no longer the outsider demanding disclosure. He was the official citing court orders, protective orders, and sealing requirements as reasons the Epstein files couldn't be released. From his perspective, the law now tied his hands. From Congress's perspective, that explanation didn't add up. Representative Dan Goldman, a former federal prosecutor, pressed Patel directly. Name the specific court orders, Goldman demanded. Identify what exactly prevents you from releasing these documents. According to public reporting and congressional records, Patel struggled to provide clear answers. No case numbers, no judges, no precise citations. That's where alarm bells started ringing. Legal analysts pointed out that many of the relevant court orders didn't prohibit release of investigatory files by the FBI or DOJ. In some cases, courts had actually encouraged transparency with appropriate redactions to protect victims. So when Patel claimed he was legally blocked, critics argued he was misrepresenting the law to Congress. In my view, this is where the situation shifts from political disagreement to potential legal jeopardy. Misleading Congress about court orders isn't just bad optics. It carries real consequences, including contempt or perjury allegations if done knowingly. And then came another twist that made things even messier. The Justice Department released additional Epstein-related materials referencing multiple co-conspirators. That release directly contradicted Patel's earlier sworn testimony where he had stated there was no credible evidence that Epstein trafficked victims to anyone else. Either Patel was unaware of documents his own agency possessed, or he had given Congress false testimony. Neither option looks good. At the same time, Patel was overseeing the termination of multiple FBI personnel, including agents connected to Epstein-related work, January 6th investigations, and Trump-related probes. Supporters argue he was cleaning house. Critics argue it looks like retaliation, especially given the timing and the specific investigations involved. Former agents have begun filing lawsuits alleging politically motivated firings. If those claims hold up, Patel could face additional legal exposure. Retaliation against federal employees for protected activity isn't just unethical, it's illegal. So now you have several threads converging at once. A fatal shooting in Minneapolis that reignited debates over lawful gun ownership. Statements from the FBI director that critics say mischaracterized the law, a growing clash with Second Amendment advocates, and a separate but deeply connected battle over Epstein files, congressional oversight, and alleged stonewalling. Judges, for their part, appear increasingly impatient. Court records show frustration with vague explanations and inconsistent testimony. Federal judges have powerful tools at their disposal, including civil and criminal contempt. That can mean daily fines, detention, or even jail time until compliance is achieved. This isn't theoretical. It happens when courts believe they're being ignored or misled. Congress is documenting everything. Patel's past media appearances, his promises, his sworn testimony, the contradictions between what he said then and what he says now. Lawmakers aren't just venting, they're building a record. From the reactions I've seen, this is no longer purely partisan. While Democrats are leading much of the oversight push, there's quiet discomfort among some Republicans as well, particularly those concerned about institutional credibility and the appearance of selective transparency. Zooming out, this entire situation taps into a deeper anxiety many Americans already feel. Trust in institutions is fragile. When officials appear to change their story depending on their position, skepticism grows fast. People start wondering whether rules are being applied evenly or only when convenient. And that's why the Minneapolis shooting, Patel's comments on firearms, and the Epstein file controversy are colliding in such a volatile way. They all raise the same underlying question. Who is accountable when power is concentrated at the top? Patel still has options. He could cooperate fully with congressional requests. He could clarify with documentation exactly what court orders apply. He could release materials with appropriate redactions and put an end to the speculation. Or he could continue stonewalling and risk escalating legal consequences. Judges have made it clear they're prepared to enforce their authority. Congress has shown it won't drop the issue, and public scrutiny is only intensifying as more details come out. This isn't about declaring guilt or predicting outcomes. It's about watching how the rule of law is tested in real time and seeing whether transparency wins out over secrecy when the stakes are this high. If you found this breakdown helpful and want to stay updated as this story develops, consider subscribing.